I used to joke that I was married to a ghost. My husband, Victor, was a true genius in the world of experimental energy, a man whose mind was always light years ahead of everyone else. He was brilliant, impossibly wealthy, and profoundly absent. Our home, this minimalist masterpiece overlooking the Pacific Ocean, felt less like a place to live and more like a high-security gallery for expensive, untouched art. And me? I was Clara, just another perfectly placed piece in his collection, admired from a distance but never truly seen. Victor spent every waking moment in his lab. It was a subterranean bunker buried beneath our house, more secure than a bank vault. The door was always locked. His conversations were always brief. He was obsessed with perfection and security, and I'd long since convinced myself that his coldness was just pure arrogance, a total lack of heart. He gave me everything money could possibly buy, but denied me the one thing I craved more than anything, a real connection. That emotional void, that deep, echoing loneliness, led me straight to Ethan. Ethan was a marine biologist, passionate about the ocean and completely grounded in the real world. We met during a coastal cleanup project I'd volunteered for just to fill my endless, empty days. Ethan was warmth, sun, and sand, the absolute opposite of Victor's cold, metallic chill. Our secret love affair blossomed quickly. He was the safe, vibrant harbor I sailed to whenever Victor's silence became too loud to bear. We exchanged notes hidden inside seashells, spoken low voices under the shadow of the cliffs, and I let myself believe that our love was pure and somehow inevitable. I had convinced myself that Victor wouldn't even care if I left. He wouldn't even notice one more statue missing from his gilded cage. My plan was simple: file for divorce as soon as our 5-year prenup was up. It would give me a small amount of independence, but I'd leave the bulk of his massive fortune behind. I was literally counting down the days until my freedom. But over the last 6 months, Victor's behavior had escalated from just distant to genuinely alarming. He looked perpetually exhausted, haunted even. He stopped eating. And his hands, on the rare occasions I saw them, were covered in these tiny, angry red puncture marks that he tried to hide beneath long cuffs. He would just stand for hours at our floor-to-ceiling glass walls, staring out at the ocean, murmuring about containment breaches and exposure limits in languages I didn't understand. My fear slowly shifted from being married to a cold man to being married to a man who was completely unraveling. I told Ethan I couldn't wait any longer. I was leaving Victor in 3 days. The night before my planned escape, I noticed something strange. Victor was gone, presumably locked away in his lab, but the little silver sparrow pin I always wore was missing from my lapel. It was a gift from my grandmother, my most treasured possession. I searched everywhere, my panic growing, until I found it. It wasn't clipped to my clothes. It was clipped to the keypad of his subterranean lab door. It was a clear, unmistakable message. He was inviting me in. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I entered the access code I had secretly memorized months ago. The heavy steel door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing not a sterile, high-tech lab, but a makeshift infirmary. The room was filled with medical equipment, not energy blueprints. There was a complex dialysis machine whirring quietly in the corner, 4 stands everywhere, and shelves stacked high with experimental drugs and monitoring devices. On the main computer screen, a large, glowing diagram showed a single human torso with multiple systems highlighted. At the center of that diagram, a tiny, pulsing node was flashing a bright, urgent red. The caption beneath it read, "Anya Defense Protocol Active." My vision blurred as I scrolled through the associated files. Victor's genius wasn't just in energy. It was in bioengineered security. Years ago, long before we met, he had narrowly survived a terrorist attack that left him with a rare, aggressive form of radiation poisoning linked to his early work. The energy project he'd been working on all this time wasn't for the world. It was a radical, desperate attempt to isolate and contain the slow-moving poison within his own body. He had surgically implanted a miniature, experimental containment field right into his chest. That was the red node on the diagram. The file explained the terrifying reality of his life. The containment field was highly effective, but required constant, painful calibration. The puncture marks on his hands were from the self-administered blood tests he had to perform multiple times a day. The distant calls were to doctors advising him on the aggressive, experimental treatment he was subjecting himself to. But the greatest shock was the reason for his isolation. The file detailed a threat assessment report. The same people who had poisoned him were now targeting his personal life, believing his emotional connections were his weakest link. To protect me, Victor had done the unthinkable. He had to make me irrelevant. He had to be so cold, so distant, so completely immersed in his work that his enemies would assume our marriage was just a functional facade, not worth exploiting. His coldness was his protection. His isolation was my fortress. He was in constant agony, fighting a literal war inside his own body, all while maintaining this cruel illusion that he was just a self-absorbed workaholic. Then I saw the folder labeled Ethan. Inside wasn't surveillance data or some kind of threat analysis. It was a thick application for a coveted marine biology research grant, a grant Victor himself was anonymously funding. Tucked into the front of the application was a handwritten sticky note. It wasn't a bitter accusation. It was a meticulous, almost loving note detailing Ethan's career obstacles. "The funding is secured," it read. "His credentials are exceptional. He needs an anchor. I have secured the coastal research facility he dreamed of. Ensure the transfer is clean. She deserves to be where she belongs, doing what she loves, next to the man who can offer her sunlight." Victor didn't just know about the affair. He had been silently, painstakingly building the future I wanted with my lover. He had identified the man who made me happy, and then, while fighting for his own agonizing survival, he had secured that man's entire life's work. The sheer selflessness of it hit me like a physical blow. He had watched me turn away from him, he had endured my betrayal, and he responded not with anger, but with ultimate, profound provision. He endured the pain of a terminal condition while working relentlessly to ensure my flight into the arms of another man would be successful and secure. I stumbled out of the lab, tears streaming down my face, the air suddenly thick and hard to breathe. I had mistaken a dying man's desperate, protective love for emotional neglect. I had judged him for being cold when he was simply being a soldier, sacrificing everything, including his final moments with me, just to keep me safe. In that instant, my deep love for Ethan evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming, agonizing mix of pity and guilt for the man I had abandoned to his silent war. I found Victor sitting in his armchair in the living room, a blanket over his legs, looking small and defeated. He saw the silver sparrow pin clutched in my hand, and he knew. He knew I had seen everything. He looked away, his eyes filled not with anger, but with shame. I walked over to him not as a demanding wife, but as a woman who finally saw the full tragic cost of his love. I knelt beside him, resting my head against his shaky hand. I didn't mention the poison or the containment field. I just held his hand, offering him the warmth and connection he had been medically and strategically forbidden from ever seeking for himself. I knew then that the greatest love wasn't the passionate fire I thought I'd found with Ethan. It was the cold, perfect sacrifice Victor had made in silence. I chose the silent war, the desperate battle, and the tragic man who loved me enough to let me go. I was his now, completely and forever, bound not by a contract, but by the unbearable weight of his final selfless act. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever misjudged someone, maybe share this with them. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that make you think. See you next time.